On the 21st of October 2015, one report did what 1,000 journalists had failed to do. A small, short-selling firm hit publish on 8 pages about a drug company called Valeant and used the one word no public company ever wants attached to its name. It called Valeant the pharmaceutical Enron. The stock was halted within the hour. 3 trading days later, $11 billion of value had vanished. And this was not some penny stock. This was the company the smartest people on Wall Street had sworn was a sure thing. This is the story of how the sure thing came apart. Valeant did not begin with a scientist. It began with a consultant. J. Michael Pearson had spent more than 20 years at McKinsey telling drug companies how to make money, and he had reached a conclusion that most of the industry found close to heresy. Research, he decided, was a waste. Why pour billions into a lab and pray that one molecule in 100 turns into a real drug when you could just buy the drug from someone who had already taken that risk? In 2008, he took charge of a struggling Canadian company. 2 years later, he merged it with a firm called BioVale and kept the name Valeant. His pitch to investors was almost rude in its honesty. Stop inventing. Start buying. Acquire the companies that already make the medicine, cut the scientists, kill the research budget, and raise the prices. Let someone else gamble. You keep the winnings. On Wall Street, nobody was offended. They were thrilled. Here was a drug company that ran like a hedge fund. No expensive labs. No 10-year bet on a molecule that might never work. Just buy, cut, and charge more. The money poured in, and for a few astonishing years, the money looked very clever indeed. The numbers were hard to argue with. When Pearson took over, the shares traded around $9.65. At the peak, in August 2015, they touched roughly $260. That is a return of more than 2,200%. At the top, Valeant was worth about $90 billion. For a brief moment, one of the most valuable companies in all of Canada. To keep a story like that going, you have to keep buying, and Valeant bought relentlessly. In 2013, it paid $8.7 billion for Bausch & Lomb, the eye care company whose name you have probably read on a bottle of contact lens solution. 2 years later, it spent around $14 billion more on Salix, a maker of gut and stomach drugs. Each deal made Valeant bigger, and each deal made the headlines, and Pearson became the man who could not stop shopping. There was just one catch. Valeant was not paying with its own cash. It was paying with borrowed money, deal after deal, until the debt had climbed to around $30 billion. That kind of leverage is wonderful, while the share price keeps rising and the banks keep smiling. It turns into a noose the moment the price starts to fall, and everyone wants paying back at once. For now, though, nobody was looking at the debt. They were looking at the chart. The shopping list was staggering. $8.7 billion for Bausch & Lomb, around $14 billion for Salix. Company after company swallowed and folded in, all of it financed with debt that eventually reached roughly $30 billion. Valeant had built an empire on a credit card, and the minimum payment was about to come due. To see how Valeant actually made its money, watch what happened the instant it owned a drug. In February 2015, it acquired 2 old heart medicines, Isuprel and Nitropress. Neither was new. Neither had been improved. Hospitals had leaned on both for decades. The day Valeant took the keys, it raised the price of one by 212%, and the other by 525%. Same drug, same factory, same pill. A different number on the invoice overnight. A United States Senate committee later printed the figures in plain black and white. Isuprel up 525%. Nitropress up 212%. A vial that had cost around $2,000 now ran close to $18,000. For a hospital treating heart patients, that was millions of extra dollars a year for medicine it had been buying, unchanged, since before most of its doctors were born. This was the real engine. Buy a drug people cannot live without, then charge whatever the desperate will pay. A cancer patient does not shop around. A hospital cannot tell a dying man to come back when the price drops. Valeant understood that better than anyone and built a whole company on the math. For a while, it passed for genius. Then the rest of the country started paying attention. Valeant was not the only one doing it. That autumn, a young executive named Martin Shkreli bought an old drug and raised its price by more than 5,000%, and the whole country recoiled. On the 21st of September 2015, Hillary Clinton, then running for president, fired off a single sentence about price gouging in the drug market and a plan to stop it. That one tweet knocked about $15 billion off American biotech stocks in a day. Valeant, the company that had turned price hikes into a business model, dropped more than 6%. The political weather had just changed, and Valeant was standing in the open. None of this scared Wall Street off. If anything, the believers dug in. By 2015, Valeant was not just a stock, it was a private club, and the loudest member was Bill Ackman, a billionaire who put his name and his reputation on the company. So many famous funds owned it that traders coined a nickname. They called it a hedge fund hotel, one stock where all the clever money had checked into the same building. Ackman and Valeant had history. A year earlier, the two had teamed up to chase a much bigger target, the Botox maker Allergan, in a hostile bid worth around $47 billion. Allergan fought back hard, sued them for insider trading, and in the end, slipped away to a rival. Years later, Ackman and Valeant would pay $290 million to settle the claims. But the message of that raid was clear enough at the time. These were not passive investors. They were hunters, and Valeant was their weapon. So Ackman defended the company like a true believer, on stage, on television, slide after slide. To him, this was the future of medicine, a lean and ruthless operation that finally treated drugs like the business they were. The higher the stock climbed, the more foolish the doubters looked. And the people running Valeant had every reason to keep the faith alive, because nearly everything they owned was riding on that share price staying up. The trouble was, the growth had quietly started to lean on a piece of the company that almost no one could see. A handful of careful analysts kept circling the same question. If Valeant was raising prices this brutally, why were patients and insurers still filling the prescriptions? Normally, when a drug gets that expensive, the pharmacy swaps in a cheap generic, and the brand name sales dry up. Somehow, Valeant's pricey originals kept moving. The answer was a company most investors had never heard of, called Philidor. Philidor was a mail-order pharmacy, and it was not the independent business it appeared to be. Valeant had helped set it up, helped fund it, and quietly held an option to buy the whole thing outright. Philidor existed to do one job well. When a doctor wrote a script for a Valeant drug, Philidor made sure the patient got the expensive Valeant version and never the cheap substitute. It pushed claims past insurers, resubmitted the ones that bounced, and kept the costly originals flowing out the door. And because Valeant controlled Philidor in everything but name, it could book sales into that pharmacy as revenue, whether or not the pills ever reached a real patient on the other end. A large slice of the company's growth was running through a captive pharmacy that Valeant had never properly explained to its own shareholders. The books looked spectacular. The only question left was whether the books were honest. That question landed in front of a man named Andrew Left. Left ran Citron Research, a small operation that bet against companies it believed were rotten, then published exactly why in public. In October 2015, he turned his attention to Valeant and Philidor, and he did not reach for soft language. He put Valeant next to Enron, the most notorious accounting fraud in American history, and dared the company to prove him wrong. The detail that lit the fuse was almost comic. A tiny California pharmacy called R&O had been hit with a demand for $69 million from Valeant for business it swore it had never done. To Left, that loose thread unraveled the whole sweater. A web of pharmacies, he argued, built mainly to let Valeant record sales that were not real. He had a name for them: phantom pharmacies. The market did not wait for a courtroom. The day the report dropped, trading in Valeant was halted after the stock fell as much as 28% in a single morning. Over the next 3 days, around $11 billion of value simply disappeared. Pearson came out swinging, called the claims completely untrue, and compared Andrew Left to a man shouting fire in a crowded theater. But the theater was already emptying. Once people start pulling a thread like that, it does not stop. Within weeks, Valeant cut every tie to Philidor and shut the relationship down. But killing Philidor meant killing the growth Philidor had been manufacturing. The miracle numbers had depended on the exact thing the company was now desperate to pretend it had never touched. Then, everyone remembered the debt. All those acquisitions had been bought with around $30 billion of borrowed money, and that arithmetic only works while the stock is climbing and lenders feel generous. With the share price in freefall, the same debt turned predatory. Valeant had built its empire on credit, and now the lenders wanted to be sure they would ever see their money again. From its peak, Valeant's stock fell more than 90%. Around $80 billion of value was wiped off the board. Bill Ackman, the truest believer of them all, finally surrendered in 2017 and sold his entire stake at a reported loss of about $2.8 billion. The hedge fund hotel had burned to the ground, and the smart money had been asleep on the top floor. In the spring of 2016, the board removed Michael Pearson. The man who had promised to reinvent an entire industry was gone, and the company he had assembled was now fighting just to stay ahead of its own loan payments. The strategy that Wall Street had crowned as genius turned out to have a much older and much plainer name. It was a house of cards in a lab coat. When investigators finally pried Philidor open, they found the rot was not only in the accounting, it was personal. A Valeant executive named Gary Tanner had been the company's main man on Philidor. Andrew Davenport was Philidor's chief executive, and the two of them, it turned out, had a private deal running on the side that their employers knew nothing about. Davenport quietly moved around $9.7 million to Tanner in kickbacks, washed through shell company bank accounts to hide where it came from. To keep it invisible inside Valeant, Tanner ran his messages through a fake email account under the name Brian Wilson. In 2018, a jury convicted both men of fraud and money laundering, and a federal judge in Manhattan sent each of them to prison for a year. The cleanup dragged on for years. In 2020, the company settled with the Securities and Exchange Commission over how it had described those Philidor sales and paid a $45 million penalty. Pearson settled too, paying a civil fine and handing money back to the company he once ran. And in July 2018, Valeant did the only thing left to do with a name that toxic. It buried it and was reborn as Bausch Health. Strip away the science, and Valeant was never really a drug company. It was a financial machine in a lab coat, built to turn medicine into a rising line on a chart. For a few years, that line went almost straight up, and hardly anyone wanted to ask how. That is the part that should stay with you. When a company grows faster than anybody can quite explain, the explanation is usually hidden somewhere on purpose, and somebody has decided you are better off not looking. If this story unsettled you the way it unsettled me, subscribe, and I will keep the books open. This has been Cooked Books.